Hey everyone, I'm going to give a quick talk on the Enochian parts of the Earth system. Now, the parts of the Earth are just as they sound. They could sort of be thought of as territories or boundaries, basically parts of the world that have over them angelic control or influence. And the idea of working this parts of the Earth system really is something that should give you some pause, because what you're really trying to do is engage in political magic. Now, this is very tempting for people who may or may not want to, be in charge of the world, stuff like that. But it is something that exists. So let's talk about using this appropriately and ethically at the very end of this video. But backing up a little bit, it is just as I said. The whole idea is that based on the locations that are all findable, more or less, in the Great Table of Earth, also known as the Watchtower tablets, you can find 91 parts of the Earth that the angels have control and influence over. Now, I've done some additional work trying to find the names, at least, of the other parts of the Earth, because not all of the known world was necessarily written out and shown. And as a matter of fact, Dean Kelly explicitly, if you look at the diaries, they stopped prematurely before they had all 121 of those. They just stopped and just moved on to something else. And this was much to Dee's chagrin, but Edward Kelly just said, nah. So anyway, so you can find the 91 names of the parts of the Earth on the tablets, and they are pretty much written out pretty well, and you can find them okay. So how does this whole system work? Well, the idea is that each of the parts of the Earth has with it associated an aether, and there's usually three, with the exception of the aether of text, which has four. There are three parts of the Earth that are associated with each aether. And then there are zodiacal kings that serve as governors. So there are 12 signs of the zodiac. And so obviously, certain zodiacal kings serve as governors for more than one part of the Earth. So they sort of have a certain amount of cachet to them. So this is more than just, okay, I reign over this sign of the zodiac and you can use me for zodiacal magic, although you certainly can, but you're also going to be using them for, in this case, you could also use them for political influence in the world. So obviously this is kind of up John Dee's alley, right? So John Dee, advisor to Queen Elizabeth, this is exactly the sort of thing that somebody who is in a position such as he was would be able to advertise to either Queen Elizabeth or Rudolph II, as the case may be, right? So this is something that would pack a lot of punch. For whatever reason, just like the Monas Hieroglyphica, he could not get the kind of interest in this that you would expect. So how does this actually work, though? And does it work? I haven't really used it as much. I have used political magic using Enochian, but not as much with using the parts of the Earth system. I used a different technique, which was effective, just not quite in the way that I had planned. But I have used the parts of the Earth system. So what would one do? Well, one would make the call to the aethers, and one would call up the aether that had that part of the Earth system in there, and you would then request, in that aether, you would call forward the zodiacal king, say, please, so-and-so, come forward, etc. And really, I use as my template this book, the Mastering the 30 Airs by Scott Stenwick. Airs, aethers, their equivalent meanings in Enochian. And then you call up that king and you say, please influence such and such. And I did have a pretty strong effect using Enochian for otherwise. And Scott Stenwick, in that it's the What Magic Is This podcast, he wound up finding that there was his it did have an effect. It did have an influence. And he recommends all of the other things. He comes from it from a very Thelemite perspective. And generally speaking, when it comes to magical workings, Crowley was pretty good about saying, okay, you got to work on all the various ways to try to get something passed, including magical, but also maybe, how about you organize a bunch of people, and that would also be effective. And Crowley really said, magic is the art of, something effecting your will, basically. And so in that broader sense, then of course doing stuff at the mundane, such as organizing, such as educating, such as getting people to the polls on time, stuff like that, all of that has an effect, including the angelic, right? It might make your organizing easier. It might do such and such. So what have I used the actual parts of the Aether? Hello, my cat's here. What have I used the parts of the earth for? And this magic in particular? Well, the main thing I've used it for is reconciling myself with, well, come on. My cat's going to be here. Come here. Okay, she's a little skittish. What have I used it for? Mainly, I've used it to reconcile the energies of such and such a place. I live in the United States. So I've said, please use this magic to reconcile myself with where I live. And it was interesting because I was using this at a time when basically the US was undergoing its Pluto return, which for those of you who don't know astrologically, anytime a planet is said to return, what you're talking about is the influence of the native or the inception chart. So if somebody's going through a Saturn return, Saturn goes back to the same spot in the zodiac that it was at when they were born. So this happens at, 27 through 30 years old. And again, in the late 50s, early 60s, that sort of thing, around late 50s to 60 years old. So the US was undergoing its Pluto return. Now, Pluto is a much slower moving planet. If you are somebody who has lived through a Pluto return, please reach out to me because you are officially the oldest person who has ever lived, unless you're counting mythological sources such as Methuselah. But anyway, the idea then is that, okay, well, the entire country is going through its Pluto return. And so it's the very first time the United States has ever had one. But the way Pluto is shaped is it's actually at a square to my midheaven, which is a sensitive point in the chart. So anyway, when that happens, one is usually going through, basically my experience of it was it's like kind of like going through a fun house and not being sure, okay, is this what I want? Is this what I don't want? Blah, blah, blah. So that was my experience of it. And one of the things I was having as an issue, as a sort of personal crisis, is, do I even want to live here in this country? Is planning to move something I should have on my agenda? And right now, question is still kind of open, but I found that when I requested the angel to the Zodiacal King to please reconcile my energies with that of the country, that suddenly it was like this big weight was taken off of me. So I found that pretty important. So one of the things I'm going to do with an upcoming ritual, which is getting only closer by the day, is I'm going to ask that each one of the parts of the earth, that my energy be reconciled with all of those, right? So you can see how this is important, right? No matter where you go, no matter what you do, you're going to be in a better way, so to speak, with the energies of the world. And that's pretty neat. And B, okay, great. Now I know, now it's like you can sort of from a Taoist perspective, right? A Taoist perspective where you're just, okay, now I can manage to just go with, or, maybe against the wave, but that suddenly means, okay, I'm going to have an easier time doing it. If the wave is zigging and I want to zag, then I'm going to find the spot where it's easiest to do that, right? Or if I see someplace I want to go to, I can actually ride that wave all the way to my destination. and I can wait until I see whatever, right? Or maybe sailing's a better analogy, right? I'm going to ensure that when I go, I'm going to make decisions such that the wind always carries me to the most direct route to where I'm looking to go, assuming speed is the most important thing. Sometimes that's not the most important thing. Sometimes I want to be ready in case I encounter something on my journey that I'm going to be doing the best I can. And I want to continually be in places where I'm able to make the most difference for the most number of people, you see. So if you limit yourself to just your own country, well, you're going to be doing the best you can within your own country, but we are a kind of a global consciousness, right, from a Buddhist perspective. So, and or, a psychedelic perspective too, maybe. So maybe we ought to really, work to not just help whatever country you live in. Americans do tend to have that, America first kind of mentality or American exceptionalism. I've never really been one of those. But as a result of that, then we really need to think through, okay, well, instead, how about we just try to be reconciled with the entirety of the globe? And so that's been my approach. So that's what I intend to do. I intend to go through all of the Aethers in an upcoming ritual. Right now it's called Jebafal 2.0 for lack of a better term. But I've been told that I will be given the actual name shortly. But I do, so just to recap, you would call forward your Aether, make your Enochian calls. I usually do calls 1 and 2. Then you call forward the Aether. You call, in addition to that, so call 19, technically call 48, for example, for the Aether of Tex. And then you say, please, you then do a conjuration within that Aether. And Scott Stenwick provides one for you. His stuff is very good. So I've found him to be he writes with the intention of getting a magician in there, working the system. And so for that, he's excellent. And then you just say, so-and-so Zodiacal King, who's a governor over this Aether, basically. And you need to know which one is which. You could call up all 12 of them, but really, if you know what you're doing, you're not going to insult that Zodiacal King. You're just going to call the one that has to do with that. You're not going to insult them by calling the other 11. But say, please, you who are, governor over this part of the earth, please do blah, blah, blah. In my case, I really only intend to, it's possible that it will change, but, and it's certainly, there's nothing wrong with asking for influence, in my view, to improve the general geostability of the world. Okay, so obviously just bear in mind that some political changes are going to be the opposite of geostability, right? Geostability, we're moving towards a place where we are getting solutions to climate change, but we're not at a place where that is a primary priority of this planet, right? So, in other words, we do need things to change, and change is the opposite of stability. Okay. Some things you want to change, some things you don't. Okay, suddenly you have a nuanced view. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about ethics. If you are engaging in magic against the way things are politically, then obviously that's going to have an effect on a lot of different people. And so you are basically saying you are willing to take on the karma of everybody in whatever part of the earth you're working with. Oh, that's not a big deal at all, right? Sometimes, sometimes, you can justify that in your own mind, but that's actually way bigger than even, let's say, working to, influence an individual. And usually what I've found is that that's never the best idea. So if you're doing it for a collective, then you really need to have a good reason for that. But there's a reason why people get politically active, right? Because you're saying, various groups of people are all saying together, we don't like the way things are, and we want to see them change. Now, is that always, are the people who are doing that, are they always the best informed? That's a real question, right? Nowadays, everybody thinks they're very well informed. So you need to, when somebody says do your own research now that's sort of like the phrase used by people of all sorts of levels of education and research and investigation, right? Because given social media and algorithms and stuff like that, people are not always really seeking good baseline sources of information. So what I usually recommend is do the things you need to do to get out of your echo chamber and learn to think critically. And how do you do that? There are courses available for that online. So once you've done all of that, then take an ethics course, because we don't want to just say, well, this is okay for me to do because blah, 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 right? Then it's all just the ends justify the means. So, okay. So usually I start with something very modest, like I want to reconcile myself with the energies of so-and-so. Even if I don't particularly agree with the way things are going there politically, it's sort of like if you are in a foreign land, you want to try your best to at least understand the culture you're with and operate effectively in that culture, because otherwise you're just going to cause problems for yourself and nobody's going to like you there. Or not enough people. How about that? Okay. So keep in mind that you're going to be taking on the karma of everybody who lives there or will live there. So make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. I think overall, just to use climate change as an example, the future survivability of humanity, and not to mention the many species with which we co-inhabit this planet, would be a good enough reason to engage in political magic. But again, you need to be careful about how you go about doing that. Again, that whole ethical thing. So one of the things that Scott Stenwick, not only in this book, Mastering the 30 Airs, I'm not doing an advertisement for him necessarily, but I did find it helpful. But generally what he speaks of on his site is not only having a charge to whichever entity you're working with, but also an injunction, right? Do this, but don't, in so doing this, do that, right? I don't do X, but in so doing X, do not do Y. And you may need to think of a long list, right? Usually that nobody suffers true harm, that is a pretty good one. In that sense, right? Like if you're taking out, a splinter, that hurts, right? That's harm. But is it true harm? I would say no, right? So these are the sorts of things that, it's harmful, but it's in the long term very necessary, So think about ways to phrase that even better than I did, right? I'm just giving an impromptu talk here. So I did want to talk a little bit about empire, because I didn't want to speak about Enochian generally, but specifically this part, without talking about some of its limitations or some of the context in which it came about. Let's put it that way. So remember that John Dee and Edward Kelly were working in Elizabethan England. And not only that, they were also trying to advertise the system to Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire. So literally, you have the word empire right there. Was it an empire? Probably not. It was maybe more of a confederation. That's sort of an old SNL bit that I'm referencing. Coffee Talk with Paul Baldwin and or Linda Richman. Those are the those are the bits that you'll be wanting to look for. But that was one of the things. Talk amongst yourselves. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Discuss. So, anyway, the whole idea is that they were. You're in this age of empires, right? And you are working with the. You're trying to affect change, right? And so, in the case of the whole context of this, Dee definitely was using his angelic magic to get things done. One of the things that he's famous for having done the magic for is the sinking of the Spanish Armada. And there's pretty decent evidence, in my opinion, on that. And so, changed the entire course of world history, right? So, okay. So he does that. But what's the effect of empire, right? Let's get right to it. So, obviously, there are a lot of problems with empire, and I am not for empire. But what are the effects, right? So, one of the main things that we see is oppression of the territories that the empire extends itself into, wars, dominance, and generally speaking, anti-democratic things. So, not stuff that I'm generally a fan of. So, okay. Why am I even working with Enochian then? Why isn't this channel a big anti-Enochian thing? Well, who's got the problem, right? Are the angels causing the problem? If we humans are deciding to go out and build empires and be inhumane to each other, or is it us, right? And obviously, the problem is whoever is in this constant state of supporting empire. And these are things that, as an American, I'm definitely, we Americans, let's put it that way, are definitely facing this day to day. And so, and obviously, the creation of America as a country involved a lot of empire building, right? We never call ourselves that. Oh, no, but we've done a lot of that, right? Look at all the military bases we have all over the world. We're a de facto empire, even though we would never call ourselves that. So I'm not for that. And I think that understanding that just because John Dee used the Enochian system to further England's goals politically, I mean, obviously, if you're about to be invaded, there's a real self-defense argument. But I don't think that that's something that we really ought to be engaging with. And why is that? Because you're basically saying this other person and their rights and all of that are less important than this glorious empire that I'm a part of. And really, any other person that you're dealing with, even people you really don't like or hate, they still have humanity, And so the real work of the heart is wrestling with this other person having humanity, and only through chance, right? Genetic chances, blah, 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 but they're still having a very human experience. Environmental factors, all the things that make us unique and different and all of that. Only through that chance are you different from how they are. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind, and maybe be a little bit humble, maybe engage in a lot of soul searching, and really think about, am I trying to personally engage in the same empire building practices? And am I trying to do that in a small way right now, rather than trying to take a humble approach? So, and then only exercising power, and lack of restraint after a lot of soul searching, right? And what are the reasons that we might have for that? Well, maybe take a look at the United Nations Convention on Human Rights. Oh, what's that? Well, look it up. Okay, so I've kind of gone over what I think generally a good use of the parts of the earth it might be, namely to reconcile yourself with the energies of whatever country you're living in, and perhaps even the entire world, and thereby making yourself more effective and less prone to having problems, and generally being helpful to other people. And I think that's about it. If you have any questions, let me know. But this is something that I came into relatively late. I hadn't really used the parts of the Earth system for certain political magic until, well, I hadn't used the parts of the Earth system for political magic. Let's put it that way. I had done other political magic like once or twice, but I don't. I don't usually think that's a good idea. I think I've grown. I think there are times in which it might be appropriate, but generally speaking, it's a no for me. So because you don't want a sort of monkey's paw effect. All right, so I've gone on at length. Once again, a 15-minute video turns into a half-hour one. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching.